My name is Blake Moore, Natural Resources Extension Agent.
Hey, I'm Dan Severson, Ag Agent.
Hi, I'm Jake Jones, Kent County Ag Agent for the University of Delaware Cooperative Extension. Welcome to Extension 302.
Hello, and thank you for taking in another episode of Extension 302. I am Blake, and with me as always are Dan Severson.
Oh.
And Jake Jones.
Hi, everyone.
Today we're going to talk about a topic that you may have been seeing in the news lately, the impending periodical cicada emergence. Brood X or Brood 10, whichever tickles your fancy. And we will get to the bottom of when to expect them and what to expect from them. So helping us bring the science to you today is Dr. Brian Kunkel. He is the Integrated Pest Management Specialist for the University of Delaware Cooperative Extension's horticulture team.
What up, Delmarva?
And his ag team counterpart, Dr. David Owens.
Howdy.
So, and then without further ado, here is Dan.
All right, guys, I'm pretty sure neither one of you guys are native Delawareans, but now you do a lot of work, or most of your work is in Delaware. So when you first got here, moved here, what is one of the things that you thought was very odd when you got here now just seems kind of normal?
Well, I'd have to say scrapple.
Blake has some deep scrapple roots going on there.
I sure do. My family has worked at the scrapple plant in Bridgeville. My mom actually worked there. And so did my sister as well. And so we sampled plenty of scrapple. I love it. And thank you so much for bringing that up.
Dr. Kunkel?
Pumpkin chunking. I had no idea what the hell that was.
Ah, yeah. That is a typical, yes, that's a good one. Yes. Yeah, I think you guys nailed Delmarva. Pumpkin chunking scrapple. There you go.
Yeah. I catapulting pumpkins across the field was completely, foreign concept.
What is the difference between dog day cicadas that we typically see every summer and the periodical cicada, which is Brood X or Brood 10?
The dog day cicada or our annual cicada is a nice green or a blackish green and white. And the belly of it is kind of white in coloration. That's one thing that'll help you tell the difference from the periodical cicada, because periodical cicada is a reddish orange and black and typically a little bit smaller. I don't know if David, do you want to throw anything else in there in terms of maybe when they come out?
Sure. So the annual cicada or the dog day cicadas, they typically start making their appearance towards the end of June, and they emerge all summer long through the end of September, beginning to end of September, depending on where you are in the state. Whereas the periodical cicada, what makes them really special is that they're the species that make up the periodical cicada group, or Brood 10 in our area, they all synchronize when they emerge. So they're all going to emerge in a very short period of time here at the probably early to middle of May. And by the end of June, they will be gone completely.
So do they make the same sounds? Would you expect to hear like it just kind of confusion of like, wait, I'm used to hearing that sound in August, but now I'm hearing it this year in May and June. Do they make the same sound, or is there going to be a difference there?
As far as I'm aware, it's going to be similar. It's just going to be more intense because there's going to be so many periodical cicadas. At least for us up north. For those that are in Sussex County and probably a good part of Kent County, if you want to hear them, you're probably going to need to take a trip up north.
The dog day cicada tends to make a more constant whining, buzzing noise. Some of the periodical cicadas, they will make a noise that's more like a woo-hoo, woo-hoo. So it tends to be a little bit different, but it's, to what Brian said, it's going to be loud.
And is that their mating call?
Absolutely. They have one purpose in life when they emerge out of the soil and live for 3 weeks, and that is to find a mate and lay eggs.
Well, thank you, guys. David, I'm glad you got to do an impression because I was going to ask you if either one of you wanted. Brian, do you want to compete with David's impression, or do you want me to move on to the next question?
I don't have the vocal range to be able to compete with that, so I'm going to have to defer to David.
Okay. Where in Delaware would you expect to see populations of the periodical cicada?
Like I alluded to, I think it's mainly going to be north of Dover.
Okay.
I wasn't here. I'm from Kentucky, and the last time there were any broods of cicadas active, I was in Georgia. And so I kind of missed them, especially for here. I didn't get here until a couple years after they emerged. But the impression I had from talking to people that are from here is that they are farther north than Dover. And you may occasionally see one south of Dover, but not in the numbers. And like you don't have the egg laying and potential damage to trees south of Dover that you could in like around campus. For whatever reason, like if I'm not mistaken, it has something to do with soil types, or soil types plays a role. I was talking to someone in Maryland and that at the university there, and they were saying that they thought it was similar to Eastern Shore, Maryland, that the further south you got on the Eastern Shore, there were little to no periodical cicadas. Whereas with the annual dog day cicada, you'll have them throughout.
Okay, so about the northern half of Delaware then. And
Yeah.
are there any expected like high concentration pockets, or is it just going to be a lot of cicadas in the whole region, like you said, and then fizzle out the further south you come?
Dave, do you know much about their population distributions? Like, are they more random? As far as I know, it's just going to be throughout the northern part without any clumping, so to say, in terms of populations. Do you know any more about that?
Unfortunately, I was not here for the previous brood emergence, but what I can say is, they spend their lives for 17 years underground feeding on deciduous tree roots. So if you've got a large area of fairly undisturbed woods, you've got a lot more potential for them than in areas that have been cleared or areas that have since grown up in those 17 years. They don't feed on pine trees, and we've got a lot of pine trees down here in Sussex County. You'll be looking for are large areas that have a lot of hardwood trees and have been that way since 2004.
Well, thank you guys. And in 2038, we'll have this conversation again about where they're going to be, and hopefully they're still in the same areas.
Now, we do have another brood, a much smaller brood that could be in parts of northern Delaware that could emerge as early as I think 2031.
Yeah.
But brood 10 is by far and away the largest, both in terms of population size and geographical distribution.
Yeah. So we had actually a couple periodical cicadas emerge a couple of years ago. Within a brood, you will have some that emerge early compared to the mass emergence that you get, and you often may have some that will emerge a little bit later. So they're outliers. I would say it was 2018 and 2019, we were seeing some of these already starting to come out, hit and miss. Got a couple up on campus. So I'm imagining we're going to have a fair number of them this year. And as Dave alluded to, there's other broods in our area that occasionally may be seen, but by far brood X or brood 10 is the largest and all-encompassing of the county.
All right, guys. So I do remember 2004 when the cicadas emerged, because I was at Fair Hill races and we were making cicada shooters with Jello. So I do remember. But can we talk about what is the life cycle of these periodical cicadas, and then go a little bit more in depth in the life cycle of brood X? There's 17 years underground. Or can we go through that life cycle for me, please?
I think it's relatively simple, and you can jump in here wherever you want, David. But as he had mentioned, they come out and have a 3-week-long party in which they drink plant fluids, mate, and lay eggs. The females, when they lay their eggs, they use their ovipositor, which is kind of like it has some serration, so it'll cut into thin branches to lay the eggs there. In those cuts, and when the eggs hatch, the nymph drops to the ground, burrows in, and begins feeding on roots. And does that for 17 years. And then they send out a text and see if everybody's ready to go 17 years later. or email, because texting wasn't a big thing 17 years ago, I guess. They probably did email. Not really. But
Instant messenger.
Yeah, there you go. And made sure that everybody was on the right page to come out. And they did. And so this time when they later died, so 2038, hard telling, how they're going to be getting the message to each other. But I think the whole feeding underground, they kind of get on the soil temperatures are pretty consistent. The food that they're feeding on is probably relatively consistent in its nutritional value. I don't know what sort of cues they may use to synchronize their emergence. I think it may just be hardwired in terms of take that long. Again, David may have some more insight to that.
Well, so the emergence and how they synchronize themselves, that is still an area of active research. We don't fully understand how they do that. Once the soil temperatures get nice and warm, and they're going to do that pretty quickly here as we move into mid and late spring. Once the soil temperatures get above 60, 64 degrees, that's when they are ready to go. And so they're starting to work their way up to the surface now.
All right, so they're just basically going to party like it's 1999. That's
2004.
Yeah.
Or 2004, yeah.
And so what type of damage do they cause? And let's start with you, Brian, around the home.
So on mature trees, you'll occasionally have some of the thinner branches or smaller diameter branches like twigs and whatnot. They may break off or snap and hang down, not completely off of the plant. And you may see some of the tree's foliage wilt from where the branches snap. That's from where the female has cut into the twigs with her ovipositor to attach give space force and attach her eggs. And we call it flagging. On mature trees, it's rarely an issue. Trees that have been recently planted, usually a year or two, the ones that have most of their branches are kind of thin, you can have a fair bit of flagging on those, and it may impact the appearance of those plants in a negative way. For fruit trees, I'm sure that if you have thin branches there that are damaged and begin to flag, it may impact the health of the plant and potentially the fruit production. I'm not 100% sure on that. For those that have the apple trees or the cherry trees, plum, or whatever, peach, in their backyard garden trying to grow a little bit of fruit from their own trees. If they've been planted within the past year or two, you may want to consider netting some of your trees during that time frame to limit the female's access to those branches to try to reduce flagging that you see. I'm not aware of any serious mortality impacts. It's more a disfiguring of the tree, and definitely it'll stress the tree as you're losing portions of branches on the smaller trees as they're trying to establish. It can make it a little more difficult for them. But the flagging is the big thing we've had for damage. And again, it's more of an issue for a younger or more recently installed or planted tree.
The homeowners don't necessarily need to do a whole lot to protect their trees unless, like you said, you just recently planted them. And I guess if you have a small amount of trees and you can net them, that's something you might want to do. But other than that, it just sounds like that it's just going to be a little bit of aesthetic damage, and that's about it.
Yeah, that's the general impression that I have had. I've been around a couple brood emergencies, not the brood X a couple times, but some other broods. And I've never really seen lots of damage. Apparently here in Newcastle last time, it was a common report where people would send samples into the diagnostic clinic with twigs or branches that had breakage, and it was due to the cicada oviposition. So, I mean, you'll see it, but in terms of overall impact on the health of your plants, if it's mature, it's not that big a deal. If it's younger, then you might consider netting.
How about in the ag sector there, David? I'm not hearing a whole lot going on there. Is there anything that anybody needs to worry about on that regard?
Well, that's interesting, and Brian actually covered it quite well from the homeowner's standpoint. From a more production ag standpoint, they are a potential concern for recently planted orchards, but that's it. In some parts of the country where there's a greater concentration of tree fruit and a greater overlap with brood 10, the recommendation is to not plant a new orchard within 2 years of the brood emergence. And that's because when they are ovipositing and damaging the outer small diameter twigs, it can mess up the tree's architecture from what is desirable on an orchard level standpoint. That's the primary concern. The trees themselves will be fine, and they do not go after any sort of field or vegetable crop.
So, David, I think you covered this before, but how long will they be around? It might feel like a long time for people when they're screaming in their backyards, but can you go over that one more time for us?
When they start emerging, they're all going to be synchronized in the area, and their life cycle as adults only lasts for about 4 weeks. It's fairly short, especially when you consider how long they've been underground waiting for their time to shine, so to speak.
You were around this part of the country for the last appearance of these cicadas, brood X or whatever you want to call them. So what are you most excited to see or witness this time?
The noise.
The noise?
Yeah, I mean, because it's going to be impressive. Much like you hear the annual cicadas. It's with the dog day cicada, you'll hear one or you'll hear some here and there, and you know they're out and about. And it's not that big a deal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. I mean, it's almost like background kind of nostalgic family times when you were growing up as a kid. You heard the insects and whatnot, and no big deal. These you won't be able to avoid hearing them. It's going to be loud.
And David, what do they sound like? David, what are you most looking forward or excited to see?
Well, I'm really looking forward to just seeing their numbers. This is something that I've been looking forward to for a very, very long time. And I lived for a time in North Carolina, but when I moved to North Carolina, I moved just a couple weeks after they had a brood emergence. And so I missed it entirely. And that was kind of a bummer. So I'm really looking forward to seeing it and hearing their numbers. It's essentially like an entire summer's worth of dog day cicadas compressed into a couple of weeks. It's going to be impressive. Yeah, and the other thing too with these cicadas is it is a massive food source for all sorts of animals. And they come out in such massive numbers that it does not matter how many of them get eaten by birds or raccoons. Raccoons can grow very fat in a couple of weeks eating cicadas. And there's just so many, it does not matter.
The other thing is in the evenings when they start coming out and emerging, the sides of buildings, sheds, homes, whatever, if they were around in 2004, this spring, they're going to just be coated with exoskeletons as the insects come crawling up out of the ground in mass and start clinging to the sides of buildings, fences, whatever, and popping out the back of the nymphal skin to become an adult, and then they sit there and dry in the middle of the night. It's pretty cool to see that massive number of skins everywhere. Just really impressive to see. The first time I saw it was in the 80s, and I was very much into fishing and using insects for fishing bait. And I would go nightcrawler hunting and get my own worms. So I wouldn't buy them from bait stores. And the first time I saw this big, massive group of insects crawling up the trunk of a mature silver maple, it was incredible.
Do you guys have any other closing thoughts you'd like to add?
In my past, in different areas where I've had broods pop up, various entrepreneurial groups will offer them as food, like for people. It's a protein source. It's just a little crunchy. You only can try it once every 17 years, Depends on how much of a party you're into, I guess.
I think the question is, have you tried them?
I have not, because I have not had the opportunity to. Most of the time when have been in an area, it's been in transit, much like David has said, like he arrived just too late. I've
Gotcha.
either been there towards the end or in the beginning and then moved away. So I haven't had much of an opportunity to actually try anyone. I may do so this time.
Got you. So we're all gonna go to Dan's house and we're gonna have a
Yellow shooters with cicadas.
There you go.
Dan, I am there. I'm waiting on my invitation.
They'd
what
probably
about
be
your
fairly
closing?
decent deep fried.
Yep, I would imagine.
And do you have any other additional thoughts there, David?
But you know, these cicadas, they really are a special treasure on the entire planet. This is the only spot where we have cicadas on a 17-year cycle. They all come out at the same time. And so, you know, when we are looking and just marveling at the sheer numbers and quantity of these cicadas, we also, you know, let's take the time to think about how that landscape will look 17 years from now. If we take a section of woods or natural area out and put a strip mall on top of it, you know, we are impacting that population for hundreds of years later. They're in the ground for 17 years. They don't have the ability to move or replenish their numbers in that period of time. So all of the landscape changes that occur between now and 2038 will impact 2038's population, especially here on Delmarva. Think about how much has changed in the landscape in the last 17 years.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because conservation and preservation of our natural lands, this is just another reason that we need to keep on working on that. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. And, you know, I really hope this episode is also going to show folks the passion of entomologists here in Delaware. You know, to have both of you guys on staff and serve in Delaware is pretty awesome. And it's been fun so far. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
Thank you, guys.
I really appreciate the time that you've let us spend together today discussing these cicadas. They're pretty awesome, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing them here in a couple weeks.
We hope you've enjoyed today's episode and will join us next time. In the meantime, visit us online at udel.edu/extension, join our mailing list, and join us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at UD Extension. This program is brought to you by the University of Delaware Cooperative Extension, a service of the UD College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, a land-grant institution. This institution is an equal opportunity provider.